The year the sky forgot how to give, the town of Dry Hollow began to die. It did not happen in a single day. It came slowly, like a sickness that starts with a cough and ends with a coffin. The river shrank first. What had once been a wide ribbon of moving water turned into a narrow thread, then into shallow pools that smelled of mud and fish bones. The fields followed. Corn leaves curled in on themselves like burnt paper. Wheat turned pale before it could grow tall. The wind carried dust instead of rain. And high above the valley floor, from the face of Widow's Bluff, a thin line of smoke rose into the empty sky. It did not come from the cluster of wooden homes near the church. It did not come from the farms that lined the dry river. It rose from halfway up the cliff, from a dark opening carved into stone. From her home. From the girl they had called foolish. Her name was Clara Whitfield. She was 19 years old and already a widow. The day after they buried her husband, Samuel, the town tried to fold her into something smaller. Mrs. Turner offered her a spare room in exchange for cleaning. The pastor suggested she move in with his sisters so she would not be alone. Men spoke softly around her, like she might break if they raised their voices. They thought they were helping, but Clara felt like she was being buried a second time. Samuel had died in a rock slide near Widow's Bluff. He had been cutting timber when the stone above him gave way. Clara had stood at the base of that same cliff 2 days later, staring up at the wall of rock that had taken him. The townsfolk whispered that she should stay away from it, that nothing good came from that place. But Clara did not see danger when she looked at the cliff. She saw shelter. Her grandfather had been a stonemason before moving west. When she was a child, he had shown her how stone held heat, how caves stayed cool in summer and warm in winter. He used to say that wood fights the weather, but stone makes peace with it. After Samuel's funeral, Clara found her grandfather's old notebooks in a trunk. Inside were drawings of hillside homes, stone terraces, and narrow chimneys cut into rock. Most people in Dry Hollow built with wood because it was quick and familiar. But quick and familiar would not save her now. She sold the small cabin she and Samuel had built together. She sold the extra furniture, the silverware, even her wedding dishes. When she was done, she had $680 in savings. The town said she should put the money in the bank. Instead, she bought steel tools, blasting powder, rope, and a stubborn gray mule. Then she packed what little she kept and drove the wagon straight toward Widow's Bluff. They laughed when they saw her heading for the cliff. Old Mr. Dawson leaned on the railing outside the general store and shook his head. He told the men around him that grief had turned the girl mad. He said she was digging her own grave in the same stone that killed her husband. The name started that week. Cliff Bride. They said she was trying to marry the rock. Clara heard the whispers when she came into town for flour and salt. She never answered them. She simply paid in coins and walked back toward the cliff. The first strike of her pickaxe rang sharp and clear across the valley. It echoed like a gunshot. Her hands were soft at first. By the end of the first week, they were split open and bleeding. She wrapped them in cloth and kept working. She was not digging blindly. She studied the face of the cliff every morning. She looked for natural cracks and softer layers of sandstone. She marked the outline of a doorway 10 feet wide and 8 feet high. Her mule carried away rubble. The larger stones she stacked at the base of the cliff, building a thick retaining wall. If she could not grow crops in the valley soil, she would lift the soil to her. Days turned into weeks. The doorway slowly became an opening. The opening became a shallow room. The sun beat down on her back during the day. At night, she slept under a small canvas tent, listening to coyotes cry in the distance. Sometimes she cried too, but never where the town could see. By the end of the second month, she had carved 20 feet into the cliff. The inside was rough, but it was dry and solid. She left a thick column of stone in the center for support, just as her grandfather's drawings advised. Then she began the chimney. Smoke inside a cave could kill faster than hunger. She drilled upward at a sharp angle, following a natural crack in the rock. It took her 9 days to break through to open air above the entrance. The first time she lit a fire inside the stone room, she watched the smoke carefully. It curled, hesitated, then pulled upward through the narrow shaft and disappeared into the sky. For the first time since Samuel died, Clara felt something close to hope. She moved her bed inside. She built shelves into the rock. She shaped a hearth from carved stone. The temperature inside stayed steady, even when the nights turned cold. Down in the valley, the crops failed completely. At first, the farmers said it was only a dry spell. Then the wells began to sink lower. Cattle grew thin. Children coughed at night from dust. From their wooden houses, the people of Dry Hollow could see green creeping across the face of Widow's Bluff. Clara had finished her first terrace. She hauled soil up in sacks using a rope anchored to a cedar tree above the cliff. It was slow and painful work. She planted potatoes first, then beans, then hardy greens that did not scare easily from heat. The rock shaded her crops during the harshest hours of the day. At night, the stone released warmth it had stored from the sun. While the valley cracked and faded, her terrace held on. The laughter stopped sometime in late August. By September, men stood in the dry fields and stared up at the cliff. They no longer called her Cliff Bride. They called her something else now. They called her Lucky. But Clara knew it was not luck. It was stone, patience, and memory. And the famine had only just begun. The first frost came early that year. It did not bring relief. It brought fear. The sky stayed empty, hard and bright like polished glass. The ground in the valley turned brittle. When men walked across their fields, the soil cracked under their boots. The last of the corn shriveled on the stalk. The river was now nothing more than a string of muddy puddles where thirsty cattle fought for space. Clara stood on her upper terrace and watched the valley grow thin. Her potatoes were ready. She dug them carefully, brushing dirt from their skins as if they were eggs. Each one meant another day. She stored them deep inside the stone room where the air stayed cool and steady. She hung bundles of dried beans from hooks carved into the rock. She salted what little meat she had left. She did not rush. She did not waste. The cliff gave her something the valley did not: consistency. When the sun burned hot during the day, the inside of her stone home stayed cool. When the night air turned sharp and cold, the rock released stored warmth like a slow breath. She slept without shivering while others below fed their stoves with wood they could no longer spare. The first knock came one evening as the light faded. Clara had just finished milking her single goat when she heard footsteps on the narrow path she had carved up the bluff. She stepped outside and saw a boy climbing carefully, his boots slipping on loose dust. It was Henry Dawson, son of the man who had laughed loudest. He looked smaller than she remembered. "Ma sent me," he said, not meeting her eyes. "She said to ask if you had any potatoes to sell." Sell. The words sat between them. Clara studied the boy's face. His cheeks were hollow. His lips were cracked. "How many in your house?" she asked. "5." She nodded once and disappeared inside. When she returned, she carried a small sack. Not heavy. Enough. Henry stared at it like it might vanish. "How much?" he asked. Clara shook her head. "You bring me your spare seeds in spring," she said. "Every kind you have left." Quote. The boy frowned, confused. "Why?" "Because next year we plant differently." He did not understand, but he took the sack and climbed down carefully. By morning, the whole town knew. Clara Whitfield had food. At first they whispered that she had been hoarding, that she must have hidden supplies before the drought, that no one could grow crops in stone. But the truth stood plain against the cliff face. Green terraces layered upward like steps toward the sky. The second knock came the next day, then another. By the end of the week, the path to Widow's Bluff was worn smooth by desperate feet. Clara did not open her doors wide. She did not hand out food freely. She asked questions. "How many in your home? What seeds do you still have? How much livestock remains?" She kept a small notebook on a shelf carved into the stone. She wrote everything down. The town began to notice something else. She was not frightened. While merchants argued over rising prices and farmers counted empty barrels, Clara moved with quiet purpose. She expanded the second terrace. She planted winter greens that could survive light frost. She collected every drop of water from a thin trickle she had found deep in the back of the cave. It seeped slowly from a crack in the rock, steady and cold. She channeled it with small carved grooves, guiding it to her plants. It was not much, but it never stopped. Down in the valley, wells began to fail. The town meeting that November was louder than any church sermon. Men who once bragged about large harvests now argued over sacks of flour. The bank refused new loans. Mr. Dawson, thinner now and less certain, stood in the center of the room and tried to calm the shouting. "She cannot feed us all," he said, meaning Clara. But they all knew she had done something none of them had thought to do. She had trusted the rock. That winter was not bitter, but it was dry. The cold came without snow. Frost bit into the ground and stayed there. Without moisture, the fields hardened like stone. Clara's home, carved into the bluff, stayed steady. Her hearth burned slow. Her shelves held food. Her goat gave milk. Chickens scratched in a small fenced corner she had built on the upper terrace. At night, she could hear the wind move across the valley like a restless spirit. Sometimes she stepped outside and looked down at the town. No laughter now. Only darkness. The third knock came on a night colder than the rest. It was not a boy this time. It was Mrs. Turner, the same woman who had offered Clara a room in exchange for laundry. She climbed the path slowly, stopping twice to catch her breath. In her arms she carried a small bundle. When she reached the entrance, she did not speak at first. She simply held the bundle forward. Inside was her grandson, pale and shaking. "He has not eaten in 2 days," Mrs. Turner said, her voice thin. Clara felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. This was no longer about trading seeds. This was survival. She stepped aside and let them in. Inside the stone room, the fire burned steady. The warmth wrapped around them like a blanket. Mrs. Turner's eyes filled with tears at the sight of shelves stocked with food. Clara poured warm goat milk into a cup and added small pieces of boiled potato. She fed the boy slowly. She did not rush. When he finished, she handed Mrs. Turner a sack. "You will help in spring," Clara said quietly. "We build terraces together. We dig water channels. Everyone who eats will work." Mrs. Turner nodded without pride. "Yes." Quote, word traveled faster than wind after that night. By Christmas, the town no longer asked if Clara had lost her mind. They asked if she would lead. And when January came with empty cupboards and frozen fields, a group of men climbed Widow's Bluff together. Mr. Dawson walked at the front. He stopped at the edge of her terrace and looked at the stone doorway carved into the cliff. Smoke drifted upward into the cold sky. He swallowed once. "We need to talk," he said. And for the first time since the drought began, the town was ready to listen. The wind tugged at his coat as he stood on the narrow terrace, looking smaller than Clara had ever seen him. Behind him stood the pastor, 2 farmers, and the town's blacksmith. Their boots were worn. Their faces were drawn tight with hunger. "We were wrong," Dawson said plainly. "About you, about this." Clara did not answer at once. She studied each of them. Pride had left their shoulders. What remained was need. "You are hungry," she said. They nodded. "And you want food." "Yes." Quote. Clara stepped aside and motioned for them to follow her inside. The warmth of the stone room met them like a quiet promise. The fire glowed steady in the hearth. Shelves carved into rock held sacks of potatoes, jars of dried beans, and wheels of hard cheese. It was not wealth. It was preparation. Dawson stared at the ceiling, at the angled chimney cut into the rock. "How?" he asked softly. Clara did not smile. "The stone holds heat," she said. "The cliff shades the crops. Water seeps from the mountain." I paid attention. The men shifted uncomfortably. "We need your help," the pastor said. Clara folded her hands in front of her apron. "I will not hand out food until it is gone," she replied. "If I feed you without change, we will all starve by spring." Dawson looked at her carefully. "What are you asking?" "Work," she said, "and trust." Silence filled the stone room. Clara stepped to a rough drawing scratched into the rock wall near her shelves. It showed terraces layered down the face of the bluff and channels carved into the earth below. "We build more terraces," she said, "not just for me, for all of us. When the rains return, we will not let water run away again. We catch it, we guide it, we store it." The blacksmith leaned closer to the drawing. "You want us to carve the cliff?" "Yes." "And the soil?" "We haul it up." The farmers exchanged glances. "That will take months," one said. "So will starving," Clara answered. Dawson cleared his throat. "And the food?" "You work, you eat. Every person who can lift a shovel will lift one." No one argued. That afternoon, the first tools arrived at the base of Widow's Bluff. Men who had once mocked Clara's labor now stood uncertainly at the foot of the cliff, staring up at the stone face. The path she had carved was narrow and steep. They climbed slowly. Clara gave orders without raising her voice. "You dig here. You stack stone there. Do not fight the rock. Follow the grain." At first their strikes were clumsy. They tried to force the stone the way they forced stubborn mules. The rock answered by cracking tools and bruising hands. Clara showed them where to strike. She pointed out the faint lines in the cliff, the softer layers that would break clean. "Listen to it," she said. "The stone tells you." Within days, the sound of metal against rock echoed across the valley from dawn until dark. Below, women gathered near the base of the bluff. They cooked thin stew from Clara's supplies and shared it carefully. No one took more than their share. The children watched from the shade, too weak at first to help. But hunger sharpened discipline. As days passed, cheeks filled slightly. Eyes grew steadier. The blacksmith set up a small forge near the base of the cliff. His hammer rang again for the first time in weeks, shaping new tools and repairing bent ones. Sparks flew into the dry air like brief stars. Clara worked beside them. Her hands were already hard from months of carving. She swung her pickaxe with calm rhythm. When men grew frustrated, she reminded them of the simple truth: one stone at a time. The second terrace began to take shape beneath her original one. Stones stacked carefully, soil hauled in sacks from what little fertile ground remained in the valley. It was slow work, but it was shared. Winter stretched on. Supplies were measured carefully. Clara kept count of every sack opened and every jar emptied. One night, after a long day of digging, Dawson remained behind inside the stone room. "I never thought wood could fail us," he said quietly. Clara stirred a pot of stew over the fire. "Wood burns fast," she replied. "Stone remembers." He nodded slowly. In February, the sky shifted. Clouds gathered on the horizon for the first time in nearly a year. They were thin at first, like streaks of smoke. Then, thicker. The town did not cheer. They had learned not to trust too quickly. When the first rain came, it was not gentle. It fell hard and fast, slamming against the dry earth. Down in the valley, water rushed across hardened fields, carrying loose soil with it. But at the base of Widow's Bluff, something different happened. The channels Clara had ordered dug began to fill. Water flowed into them and slowed. It pooled behind low stone barriers. It soaked into terraces instead of racing away. The men stood in the rain, soaked and silent, watching their work hold firm. Clara stood at the edge of the upper terrace. Water ran down carved grooves toward her crops. It did not wash them away. It fed them. Dawson climbed beside her, rain dripping from his hat. "You were right," he said. Clara did not answer. She simply looked out over Dry Hollow as water filled the holding basin they had carved at the base of the cliff. For the first time in months, the valley did not look like a grave. It looked like a beginning. But rain alone would not erase the famine. They still had weeks of hunger ahead. And Clara knew something else the town did not yet understand. The hard part was not surviving the drought. The hard part would be changing how they lived once it was over. Spring did not arrive gently. It arrived with mud, hunger, and doubt. The rain had filled the channels at the base of Widow's Bluff, but the valley below still looked wounded. Fields that once grew tall corn now lay stripped and uneven. Many farmers had no seed left. Livestock numbers were cut in half. Some families had left in the night, wagons creaking west in search of easier land. Those who remained climbed the bluff every morning. The terraces multiplied slowly down the stone face. What had once been a single narrow strip of green beneath Clara's doorway was now 3 wide steps of soil and stone, each one held firm by walls built from the very rock they carved. Men who had once measured success by acres of flat land now measured it by inches of carved cliff. The work changed them. They no longer argued over who owned what field. They argued over how deep to cut a water trench. They listened when Clara spoke. Even Dawson, who once laughed loudest, asked her before making decisions. Clara did not speak as a ruler. She spoke as someone who had already survived alone. "Plant deep," she would say. "The surface lies. The deeper soil remembers moisture." "Do not waste seed," she warned. "Each one is a promise." She divided the remaining seed among families but required something in return. Every household would build at least one small terrace of their own, even if it was only a narrow strip along a hillside. No more planting only on flat land. No more trusting a river that could disappear. Some resisted at first. "This is too much work," one farmer muttered. "My father plowed the valley floor his whole life." "And your father never saw a drought like this," Clara answered. There was no anger in her voice, only truth. The blacksmith's forge burned daily now. His name was Thomas Hale, a quiet man who spoke little but worked without pause. He reforged tools with harder edges, shaped metal hooks for pulley systems, and built sturdy iron braces to strengthen terrace walls. At night, Clara often remained outside her stone home long after others had gone down the path. She would sit on the upper terrace and watch lantern lights flicker in the valley. The town no longer felt separate from the cliff. It felt connected to it. In late April, the first real green returned to the valley floor. Thin shoots broke through the soil where families had replanted carefully, following Clara's advice. They dug small irrigation lines that fed from the water basin below the bluff. They built low ridges to slow runoff. When the wind came, the soil did not lift as easily. One afternoon, Mrs. Turner climbed the bluff again, not with hunger in her eyes this time, but with something else. "My grandson is stronger," she said, smiling faintly. "He wants to help dig." Clara nodded. "Then let him." Children began to carry small stones, to pack soil into cracks, to fetch water from the basin. Their laughter slowly returned, thin at first, then stronger. Dry Hollow no longer felt like a dying town. It felt like a workshop. But not everyone was content. A small group of men met privately one evening in the old general store. They spoke in low voices about pride and independence. "We built this town ourselves," one said. "Now we take orders from a widow in a cave." Dawson heard about the meeting. The next morning he climbed the bluff early, before the others. Clara was already awake, feeding her chickens. "There is talk," he said carefully. "There is always talk," she replied. "They say you hold too much control." Clara leaned against the stone wall of her home. "I hold no deeds," she said, "no contracts. I hold knowledge. Anyone can learn it." Dawson studied her face. "What if they choose not to?" "Then they will be hungry again," she answered simply. He exhaled slowly. By early summer, the water basin was nearly full. Terraces along the bluff stretched wider. Some families had begun carving shallow storage spaces into smaller hillsides, following Clara's design on a simpler scale. The change was visible. When heavy rain came again in June, the valley did not flood wildly. Water moved through the channels, filled storage pits, and soaked into prepared soil. Crops stood stronger. Corn rose taller than anyone expected. The goats on Clara's upper terrace multiplied. She shared 2 young goats with families who agreed to build proper pens along the hills. Milk returned to more tables. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Clara stood beside Thomas Hale on the highest terrace. "You could leave," he said quietly. "You could go somewhere easier." She shook her head. "This place was not wrong," she said. "We were." He looked at the valley, green now in patches instead of brown. "You changed it." "We changed it," she corrected. The famine loosened its grip slowly. No feast came. No sudden wealth returned. But hunger eased. And something deeper shifted. The people of Dry Hollow no longer laughed at the cliff. They studied it. They walked its paths without shame. They listened to stone. But Clara knew something else. Hard times had united them. Comfort might divide them again. And she wondered which would be stronger when the valley was full once more. Summer settled over Dry Hollow with a different kind of heat. Not the cruel heat that had cracked the earth the year before, but a steady warmth that carried promise. Corn stood shoulder-high in the valley. Bean vines climbed wooden stakes along terraced slopes. The water basin below Widow's Bluff shimmered under the sun, half full, even after weeks without rain. The town breathed again, but Clara did not forget how quickly breath could leave. She rose before dawn, as she always had. She checked the water channels for blockages. She ran her hand along terrace walls, feeling for loose stone. She counted sacks of grain stored inside her stone home. She never allowed comfort to dull her memory. The harvest that year was modest, but it was enough. Families filled small barns again. Children no longer went to bed hungry. Laughter returned to the churchyard on Sundays. One evening, the entire town gathered at the base of Widow's Bluff. No one had called the meeting. It simply happened. Men, women, and children stood facing the cliff as the sun dipped low behind it. Clara stepped out onto her upper terrace when she heard her name carried upward. Dawson stood at the front. "We owe you more than thanks," he said. His voice was steady now, not proud, not ashamed. "You saved this town." Murmurs of agreement moved through the crowd. Clara looked down at them. "I did not save you," she said. "You chose to change." Mrs. Turner stepped forward with her grandson beside her, stronger now, taller. "We followed you," she said. Clara shook her head gently. "You followed the work." Silence settled. Then the pastor lifted a small wooden sign. It had been carved carefully and painted in dark letters. It read, "Whitfield Bluff." The crowd looked up at Clara, waiting. She stood very still. The name felt heavy. Finally she spoke. "This place does not belong to me," she said. "It belongs to the stone and to anyone willing to respect it." Dawson lowered the sign slowly. "Then teach us," he said, "so we never forget again." And so she did. Over the next years, Clara turned her carved home into more than shelter. She turned it into a school. She taught farmers how to read rock layers and find natural water paths. She showed children how to stack stone without mortar so walls would bend but not break. She taught families to build small storage caves into hillsides for grain and tools. Thomas Hale expanded his forge and trained young apprentices to shape stronger tools. The water basin grew larger, reinforced with stone and timber. Irrigation channels branched like veins across the valley. When new families arrived from the east, they did not laugh at the cliff. They asked to see it. Clara married again 3 years after the famine ended. Not out of loneliness, out of respect. Thomas Hale asked her quietly one evening while repairing a metal brace near her doorway. "I will not ask you to leave this place," he said. "I only ask to build beside you." She studied his hands, strong and scarred like her own. "Yes," she said simply. They were married on the second terrace, surrounded by townsfolk who now saw the cliff not as a symbol of madness, but of wisdom. Years passed. Dry Hollow no longer feared drought the way it once had. When rains were heavy, terraces held firm. When seasons were dry, stored water carried them through. Grain was never planted without backup stores carved into cool earth. Children grew up knowing how to dig channels before they knew how to write their names. Clara's stone home expanded slowly. Additional rooms were carved deeper into the cliff. A larger storage chamber held grain for lean years. The chimney was widened. Windows were cut carefully to catch morning light. The smoke that once rose alone now rose alongside others. Small stone dwellings dotted the lower slopes, built by families who had learned from her. Decades later, Clara sat on the upper terrace with silver in her hair and lines across her hands. Below her, the valley was green, not perfect, not wealthy, but steady. Her grandchildren ran along the terraces, carrying small baskets of beans. She watched them carefully, the way she once watched stone and soil. Dawson, older now and slower, climbed the bluff one last time to sit beside her. "You were 19, he said quietly. "We thought you were broken." Clara smiled faintly. "I was," she answered. "Stone does not break from one strike, it shapes." He looked over the valley. "We almost lost everything." "Yes," she said, "but we did not." Clara rested her hand against the warm rock beside her. Even after years, the stone held the day's heat. "The earth remembers," she said softly. "We only needed to listen." When she passed many years later, they buried her not in the valley, but near the base of the bluff she had carved into life. They placed no grand monument, only a simple stone marker with her name. And above it, terraces layered upward into the cliff, green and steady, proof that patience and hard work could turn rock into refuge. The town never laughed at the cliff again. If this story moved you, share it. Leave your thoughts below, and follow for more stories of courage and survival in the Wild West.